Ummah did not happen by chance. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who made you a justly balanced ummah. Why did Allah create us as a justly balanced ummah? So that you will be witnesses for Allah to humankind, and the Prophet be witness of Allah to you. But Islam historically spread more by people being shuhada, witnesses for Allah in their own behavior, in their own ethics, in their own productivity. It is only when we pursue that path and implement this concept of just balance in our lives as Muslims that we can give, insha'Allah, the shining example for the rest of humanity. There is a difference between saying that something is irrational and something that is supra-rational, above the limits of our human minds and rationality. Something that is irrational is obviously something that can be proven conclusively. That's the point. Proven conclusively, even to the skeptic, that it's false. The example I gave is a perfect example. 1 + 1 is 174, 3/4. How come? Accept it, believe, be humble. You don't understand everything in this world. No, it is not to me a mystery. It is not ghaib. I can prove conclusively that this is false, right? But when we speak about ghaib, that's a different issue. Example, if you get a hardcore atheist, very skeptical, very argumentative, and he tells you, you as a Muslim, prove to me that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. Now, you and I are aware that there are tons and tons of proofs that appeal to not only to the heart but to the mind and fitrah about the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The i'jaz in the language, the i'jaz of the content, the i'jaz of science, all kinds of things. But for a skeptic who insists on only tangible and physical evidence, you cannot conclusively, can you? Can you conclusively prove to the skeptic that Allah exists? You can try your best, but you will come up with argument after argument. But by the same logic used by that atheist, can he prove to me conclusively and definitively that Allah doesn't exist? He can't. He can raise doubts. He can make arguments. But I say, I use your own logic. Give me a physical evidence that Allah does not exist. You know, he might say, well, we don't see him. We don't touch him. I say, right, there are many things even in the physical world that you cannot see, let alone something beyond this world. You know, sometimes I remember the story of an atheist professor who entered into the classroom, teaching philosophy probably, and he told his students, did any of you guys ever see God, this thing you talk about? Anyone saw God? They said, no, teacher. Did any of you touch God? They said, no. Did any of you hear God? They said, no. He said, therefore, he does not exist. And a smart student stands up and says, does any of you guys see the brains of our teacher? They say, no. Does any of you hear the brains of our teacher? They said, no. He said, therefore, you know what's coming. So you cannot prove it definitively. You cannot disprove it definitively. We cannot call that irrational. You cannot call that irrational until you prove it's false in no uncertain terms. But that we call supra-rational, something that is beyond the limits of our human intelligence, our human perception. And psychologists would tell you that even in our perception, two people can see the same thing from different angles, see different things in what they're looking at. And to put it in a very simple term then, using our own Quranic term, that's what is called ghaib. things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to keep away from us because we cannot bear them while we are living here on this earth. And on the mention of ghaib, something really attracted my attention. And I was very elated, to think about it. The first ayat revealed in the Quran, in Surah Al-Alaq, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. In this first revelation to the Prophet ﷺ, it speaks about اقرأ, which could mean read or recite. Both meanings are acceptable. It speaks about the pen, learning, and throughout the Quran and hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, you find numerous other ayat, plethora of ayat and ahadith that also praise learning. Not only religious knowledge, which is a must for all, at least the minimum, but any form of learning. The Quran refers even to sciences, learning the creation of the universe and all of these sciences or branches. But as you know, the final order of the Mus'haf, which was not the invention of anyone, that's Jibreel, showed that to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, did not follow the order of revelation. And if you look at the very beginning of the Quran, first you have Al-Fatiha. Al-Fatiha, basically, the opening surah of the Quran, is like an introduction to the whole Quran. It's a prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking the guidance to the straight path of Allah and praising Him. So in a way, it's like introduction to the Quran, summing up the whole message of the Quran in few ayahs. But then really when you get to longer surahs, it begins with Al-Baqarah. So practically it's the first one after the introduction. And if you take the first lines of introduction, Alif, Lam, Mim, and so on, you find that it begins next to give the profile of believers. And what is number one in the profile of believer? هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. What? الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. Isn't that amazing? Before it mentioned prayers or zakah, it mentioned those who believe in the unseen. Not the irrational, the supra-rational. Those who believe in ghaib, the unseen. Isn't that amazing? That the beginning was about reading and knowledge, and the beginning of the final tartib of the Quran is about believing in al-ghaib and trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And realizing, as you begin to read this book, that you will encounter certain things that the more you try to explain it, the more you get entangled. Like qadar. If Allah knew this, why does He punish me? All of this kind. Once you get into that circle, you can only get more and more entangled. No wonder the Prophet ﷺ say, إِذَا ذُكِرَ الْقَدَرُ فَأَمْسِكُوا. If people keep dwelling on qadar, I don't call it exactly predestination as most, I say it measure, which is closer to the Arabic term, measure. There are certain measure or laws that Allah has created. That if this is mentioned, don't you keep dwelling on it. You will see things about paradise and hellfire, and again, you can't imagine it with your own little minds as humans. The collective human cannot understand it. No wonder when some of my sisters in America or elsewhere ask me, oh, in paradise there is the huris for men. What is for women? Beside referring to the Quran that says, hum wa azwajuhum, that the wives in this life, the pious wives, will be joining their husband. They tell them, look, the Prophet ﷺ answered that question in a most beautiful way. Referring to paradise, he said, فيها ما لا عين رأت ولا أذن سمعت ولا خطر على قلب بشر اقرأوا إن شئتم فلا تعلم نفس ما أخفي لهم من قرة أعين جزاء بما كانوا يعملون. He says in paradise there are things that no eye has ever seen, no eye has ever seen, no ear has ever heard, and no thought even could have occurred to a human mind. And they said, recite if you will, and he quoted an ayah in the Quran, no soul, even prophets, no soul knows what pleasures and delights are hidden for them in the hereafter, meaning in paradise. And there are lots of evidence. I don't want to dwell on that. If there's interest in that, I can give you some more in the question answer bit. But what I'm saying basically, by emphasizing that those true believers, beginning with believing in ghaib, resolve many of the questions about suffering in the world, why Allah did this, because Allah is not to be questioned, we are to be questioned as His creatures. It is amazing also that following that, after mentioning believing in ghaib, establishing regular prayers, zakah and so on, and then it says, وَالَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ وَمَا أُنزِلَ مِن قَبْلِكَ. Those who believe in what has been revealed before you, okay? And they believe in the hereafter. It's ghaib again, coming to ghaib, and an emphasis on the fact that Islam does not stand unique in having an element of the unseen, of ghaib, because all prophets also taught exactly the same message. Now, this is a wasatiyya then, that Islam emphasizes knowledge, using the mind in the scope where the mind is equipped to do, but then trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in matters that exceed the limits of our human mind. Just balance. In the matter of worship, some people may have the impression that the more you worship, the better. And we find extremes in that also. Those who believe that you have just to renounce this world, isolate yourself, be a monk, for example, leave this life away, just seek salvation away from society. And there are those who have no notion of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's not in their lives. At least their choice is not to follow His path in their lives. What is the just balance? The just balance is typified by the hadith where it was said that the Prophet ﷺ overheard 3 people. One of them, apparently all were good people trying to get close to Allah. So one of them said, I will pray every night, just like staying the night in prayers. And the other one said, I will fast every single day, not just Ramadan, every single day. And the third one said, I'm not going to marry at all. Apparently, he doesn't wish women distract him from worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when the Prophet ﷺ overheard that, he said, are you the guys or the people who said so and so? They said, yes. He said, I am the most knowledgeable of you of Allah, and the most one who fears Allah amongst you. However, I pray, meaning sometimes or some part of the night, and I sleep. I fast, voluntary fast, some days, and I break the fast other days. And I get married to women. This is my sunnah, this is my way. And anyone who deviates from my way, he is not of me. Enjoyment of the permissible thing in this life is no sin at all. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ مَنْ حَرَّمَ زِينَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي أَخْرَجَ لِعِبَادِهِ وَالطَّيِّبَاتِ مِنَ الرِّزْقِ. Say, who had the power or authority to make what Allah made lawful to His people unlawful? The good things that Allah created for us. In fact, we are commanded in the Quran to eat and drink to sustain our lives. وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا, eat and drink. But what it says after that? وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا, but commit no excess or waste. Perhaps the most wasati, justly balanced approach to life is the one that we find in Surah Luqman, when he gives an advice to his son. He says, وَابْتَغِ فِي مَا آتَاكَ اللَّهُ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةَ وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا وَأَحْسِنْ كَمَا أَحْسَنَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْكَ وَلَا تَبْغِ الْفَسَادَ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُفْسِدِينَ. Seek in what Allah bestowed upon you the hereafter. That's the more permanent. But forget not your share in this life. Be good as Allah has been good to you, and seek no mischief on earth, for Allah doesn't love the mischief makers. Balance, not going into an extreme or the other to either become too materialistic or to be spiritually developed. In the third area, where we find this just balance manifest, and I'll put them all together because of time, because you can analyze each one of them separately. In the social, economic, and political life, we find the balance between greedy individualism, as if the worship of the individual right is everything at the expense of collectivity, And you find the other extreme of subjugating individuals, canceling their basic human rights, canceling their identity, their personality, their freedoms for the sake of the collectivity, totalitarian type of system. You find it in economics, you find it in politics, you find it in social life also. Huge diversion or ghulu, extremes on one side or the other. You look at Islamic teaching in society. It respects the individual, the identity of the individual, but balance that with the need of society, not tilting too hard in one direction or the other. In political system, Islam doesn't accept, in my humble understanding, the rule of one person or one family or one party, or a ruling of a person who calls himself a president of a democracy, yet democracy is nothing but a superficial veneer, and it's nothing but another dictatorship, another form of dictatorship. No. Nor does it say, all right, to respect the people's rights and to avoid wrong political decision by powerful people, let us have no government at all. In Islam, there is order, but there is shura. And shura is not only in politics, shura is in the family, in the community. It applies to all. And shura here means that people have every right to participate in the choice of their leaders. They have every right to participate legitimately, given process, in the political decision-making process. They have every right to hold those rulers not as absolute sovereigns. No, the only absolute sovereign is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To hold them responsible for their decision, the right to remove them according to the law or constitutions from power if they are incapable or dishonest, or in some cases combining both traits. So here again, people participate, but there is order. There is also the command of the Prophet ﷺ to obey those in power. At least in one interpretation, it could be the rulers who are ruling. That's why the Khalifas after the Prophet ﷺ, especially the first two, were very clear and humble. I have been chosen your leader and I'm not the best of you. If I do right, help me. If I do wrong, correct me. Correct me. One time even a man stood in the masjid, and when Umar said that, he said, Umar, if we find any crookedness in you, we will correct it by our swords. Sayyidina Umar did not call the intelligence, that's the special intelligence and the military intelligence and the intelligence on the intelligence to arrest this man who addresses the ruler in this language. And he says, Alhamdulillah, thanks to Allah that He made among my followers those who are willing to correct me even by the sword if need be. Of course, he doesn't condone violence, but this was, metaphorical, just exaggeration on the part of the man. And Umar said, yes, even if it need be, correct me by the sword. In the economic system, again, we don't find that greed in the name of creativity and entrepreneurship and so on, because it gone too far sometimes. In fact, deviation from the basic Islamic premises is what caused the recent economic collapse. Finance experts, and not one, say that there are two major things that brought this economy down, and we're still suffering until today. One is dealing with interest. Two is selling phantom things, not real assets. Like you make a document for mortgage, you sell it to a bank, and a bank sell it to a bank, it balloons until the balloon cannot take it anymore, it pops. And that's the kind of collapse. So there is no tilting or ghulu, exaggeration in entrepreneurship or exaggeration in subjugating everybody to central planning of the government. And by the way, you know that after the recent economic crisis, a lot of Western people and experts in finance have been trying hard to study the Islamic finance system, because they found that Islamic banks, if they are truly Islamic, either did not suffer or their losses were far less than others. So this is again just balance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Finally, or semi-finally, we can find the manifestation of this just balance of Islam in our approach to understanding Islam, in responding to the demands of modern age without diverting from the thawabit, the things that are stable in our Sharia. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi actually wrote on that subject. He talked about al-usul al-20, that's it, like 20 points that he showed this balance. Of course, we cannot cover them all, but let me take 3 or 4 of them as an example that relate indeed to the duty and the responsibility of contemporary learned and qualified Islamic scholars to deal with the rising plethora of problems that humanity is facing today. One of them is that we have to have a balance between the permanent thing in Sharia that we should not tamper with. We don't go and make copy editing of the Quran. We don't make copy editing of the word of Allah, but try to understand it better, yes. So between the thawabit on one hand and between the needs of society, so don't need society as a prelude or excuse, not to abide by the rules of Allah, so everything becomes halal without any due process of jurisprudential interpretation. The balance between the permanency and stability of the supreme objective of Islamic law, or maqasid al-Sharia. I'm using Islamic law loosely, but Sharia is not exactly the equivalent of Islamic law, but that's an issue that requires different explanation. Between the maqasid of Sharia, ultimate objectives, and the flexibility in the means of trying to arrive at those maqasid. Why maqasid are stable? Because look at them. They are aimed at safeguarding faith of everyone, by the way. Faith, life, mind, family, or descendants. Some say dignity in general, honor, meaning dignity of the human, property. And by the way, these are the most common 5, but Tahir bin Ashur, for example, one of the great scholars from North Africa, actually he said that they're not fixed because you can also add justice, so long as it's something permanent, something conclusively taught in the Quran and Sunnah. But it's a matter of how to put the hierarchy or how to split them or combine them. These are objectives that do not change, does it? Can anyone say that there will be some time when we don't need to safeguard life or property or honor? They are permanent. But how to achieve that in a Shari'i way, an acceptable way, that can vary also. So there could be both stability and dynamism also, and flexibility.